Welcome along to In Conservation With. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Bird, as you probably know. And I must say, before I even go any further, just one thing I've learned since last season is to name the sponsors early doors, so you don't forget. So Leica Sport Optics, thank you very much. And also thank you to King's Place Music Foundation. And they've sponsored this for, well, till the end of the year as part of their Nature Unwrapped season. So that's really cool. I'm really delighted to have Kate MccGwire here today, tonight, this afternoon, because some people are from America. I'm really delighted because I actually saw her work. I glanced at it maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I suddenly thought, wow, that's amazing. I must talk to this woman. And I was really delighted that when I contacted her, some guy out of nowhere contacting Kate, she actually said yes, which is amazing. So here she is tonight. So Kate, good evening. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm in my studio, which is normally bathed in beautiful daylight, but at 7 o'clock in the evening, it's a different story.
Yeah, that's the problem with winter. Well, yeah, I suppose it is winter now in UK. It becomes very grey and dismal. It's been like that all the time. Your boat, which you showed me before, because I remember when I spoke to you before, actually doing this.
It was daylight.
Yeah, and it looks really interesting. Nice foliage outside. What sort of stuff have you been seeing recently?
Well, we're on the confluence of the Thames and the Way navigation here, on the lead up to the Way navigation. And so we're on a little bit of a backwater where not many boats come past, and we have cormorants, herons, and 3 kingfishers. I saw 3 kingfishers together, which I've never ever seen before, earlier on this summer. And you know, there's a wealth of bird life here, and I'm only 14 miles from central London, so I feel very lucky to have this little bit of wilderness.
May I ask you, do you actually live on that boat, or is that your studio?
No, we did live on it for quite a long time. I bought the barge about 15 years ago, and at the time I had my teenage boys, so that wasn't possible to live with them on the barge, but not enough space and work here. But when they left home to go to university, I moved onto the barge and I've sold my house. So and now I've bought a little property with a large mooring, so I can have my studio effectively at the end of the garden. And here we are surrounded by woodland. We've got wooded area, a parkland on one side, and then a little island opposite us, which is uninhabited apart from 5 weekends a year where there's little chalets and huts. So there's, you know, amazing wildlife on that. We've got, well, we have lots of nesting birds. We have kestrels and owls. I heard a barn owl last night. And you know, had kestrels nesting, not this summer, but the summer before. We've got mink, unfortunately. And the swans were nesting on the island opposite me. I could see them sort of nesting there, and saw the fox actually decimate the eggs after they'd been on them for so long. They're almost hatched. Really devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, another question about being on a barge. I mean, I've known friends who have barges, and I've walked past them quite a lot when I've walked up and down the Grand Union Canal and other canals. How does it feel to live in a barge? Do you feel safe? I mean, you haven't got an alarm system, have you? Or do you?
What do you mean, safe for security-wise, or from the water?
No, from people sort of jumping onto your boat and hijacking you, or you know.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about being here. We're on our own bit of land, and there's no path next to us, so there's no public going past us. We're just in this anomaly of a bit of the river where there's no public access.
Cool.
They sort of go behind the house down to the lock, and so they don't come past us. Nobody walks past us, which is brilliant.
Now, I've done a little bit of reading up about you, because obviously, you know, you're a guest and I need to, you know, have some sort of interest in what you've done in the past. I know that you grew up in Norfolk. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Anywhere in particular?
I was born in Wroxham,
Oh,
um, in the middle of all the boatyards in Wroxham, and my dad worked for a boat building company. And they'd come from London and they didn't really know anything about the country. But I've got three elder siblings. They were born elsewhere and I was born in Norfolk when they arrived. And my parents weren't particularly interested in wildlife, I suppose. But I was left to be a bit feral there, which was wonderful.
and do you have an early recollection of being connected or interacting with nature at all? As I always say and always ask, my American friends always ask me, have you had a spark moment when something turned up and you suddenly thought to yourself, oh, that's it, I'm interested?
Well, all the time really, because we were completely surrounded by nature on the boatyard. Got the birds nesting in various places in nooks and crannies, robin coming into the yard and feeding from your hand, and just everything. And when we would go out on boats a lot at the weekend, my parents had this little rather shabby boat, but we'd go out, and I was intrigued by how the push of the water along the Norfolk Broads, the rivers would sort of empty out the river, and that would drag the reeds along, and it would reveal these holes in the banks of voles and all sorts of creatures. And that really intrigued. I mean, just they always used to say I'd be the one that was spotting, a bittern in the reeds and all that sort of thing. So, swallowtail butterflies up at Hickling Broad, and just it was there all the time.
You miss Norfolk? Do you go back still? Or?
I go back, yeah. I try and go back quite a lot. Haven't been able to this summer, but I have lots of friends still there.
Yeah. Shailesh has been asking, did you get to see any kingfishers? I know you mentioned it earlier, but
yeah. Well, I swim in the river here normally every day. I haven't done for the last couple of weeks because I've had earache, but I swim from about March onwards, and one of my delights is seeing the kingfisher, and he will shoot down the river and then just go over my head, and it is a sort of moment. I hear him probably 20 times a day because he has a very shrill call. I don't even know how to describe that call, but it is a very shrill and specific call, isn't it? And I don't know whether this is normal for kingfishers, but he tends to make the call before he flies, so I can hear it. I look out of the window and then I see him. So I don't know, is that normal?
I don't know actually, because I've seen kingfishers. I mean, you probably have much more intimate knowledge of kingfishers than me, because I normally see them flashing past, calling. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not at eye level with them like you are usually.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you probably know more than I do.
Yeah, and they zoom right across. There's a weir opposite, and they zoom right across to the sort of trees by the weir, and then come back. So I don't really know where they're nesting, but they're pretty active.
Oh. Now, as a child, I mean, we'll talk about your amazing art in a minute. But as a child, did you actually realise that you had artistic tendencies? Did you sort of pick up a pen and pad and were you drawing all the time, or was this something that came late to you?
It was really the only thing that I felt inspired by. I am very dyslexic, and school was tricky, and the only thing I felt good doing was drawing and painting. And the only thing I was ever praised for was that. So, yeah, no, I mean, I've always done it. So I've actually got a peacock feather that I drew when I was like 9 or something, that my mum has in her house. So that sort of shows proof of that interest back then.
And what was young Kate like? What kind of young woman were you, young girl?
Always in trouble, actually, which was I think, always very enthusiastic and sociable, and but quite naughty, I think. But I don't, I was pretty feral back then. My parents, I think, had got, they'd raised 4 children and they got bored, I think, and had their own issues, and I sort of got away with a lot more probably than my elder siblings, because they'd lost interest, I think, by that point. Mm.
You sort of you went, I believe you went or graduated from art college in the early 2000s, yeah.
Mm.
So what was your life before that?
So I wanted to do a fine art degree when I was 17, 18, but my parents absolutely refused to pay for me to go to uni, to go to art school, because they were worried that I wouldn't be able to get a job and that sort of thing. So they did agree to sponsor me through interior design school. So I went to a school that was heavily based in architecture in Manchester, and I enjoyed parts of it, but when it got to dissertation time, I had not a clue how to write an essay, and so I left and didn't finish my degree. I worked as in interior design firms because I could do the drawing and I could do the rendering and all the visual aspect of the work, and I could draw plans and things. I have very good spatial awareness, which has been really, really helpful for me being a sculptor. But I couldn't write the essay, so that was I felt ashamed, and yeah, that was not my finest moment.
I guess in those days, dyslexia wasn't something that was recognised as,
No.
just,
My mum's a primary school teacher, and she just thought it was an excuse for people that were thick.
yeah.
So
I understand that because as a kid, ever since I can remember, I've been deaf practically in my left ear. And I remember being in primary school, and when they discovered that I had a hearing impediment, they said, right, okay, you need to sit at the front of the class and on the right-hand side. And of course, I didn't want to do that because you felt like you were sort of being spotlighted. People saying, taking the mickey, sort of shouting at you as if you can hear a thing, and
yeah,
rebelling and being at the back of the class and all that sort of stuff. So I totally kind of get it in one respect.
yeah. But when I had children later on, I was still doing interior design projects, sort of the architecture of it, rather than not sort of curtains and chairs and fabrics, that sort of thing. It was more about the spatial awareness and planning, private dining areas and in larger companies, so not domestic interiors. But I was bored, I was really, really bored. And when I had my boys, I went back to university when my youngest son was 6 weeks old, and did a part-time degree, 2 days a week, looked after the kids the rest of the time, had the 2 days of study, and I loved it. And it was just, I felt like I was home, and it was what I was meant to have done, and I've just done it sort of 15 years later. Anyway, so a late starter.
It's never too late. I actually live by that, because I myself didn't start in my career until very late on in life as well. So, sometimes you discover things later. At least you discover it, because some people don't.
Yeah.
So, okay, you did your, you did your course, you graduated. What happened next? How did you kind of firstly fall into what you're doing now? What was your first kind of break? How did it work?
Well, I went on to do an MA at the Royal College of Art for 2 years, and there is always an amazing show of all the work you've done over the 2 years. And I put my work up. I didn't have any clue about what was going to happen for me, and funny enough, actually, I mean, I'm sure people didn't do it intentionally, but I was sort of feel like, because I was an older student, you were slightly dismissed as being boring. And so we put our shows up, and the night before the opening, Charles Saatchi came in and bought my piece. And it was, I'd always thought that I'd be picking it off the wall and putting it in shoeboxes underneath the bed, and he bought it. That was just astounding. And then I got a call a few days later to say that they wanted he often buys student work and then he just sits on it and waits to see whether they do anything. And with my piece, I was asked to go and put it up at the Saatchi Gallery at County Hall the day after my show finished at the Royal College of Art. So I was very, very lucky to be there, have him come in and buy it.
That's absolutely stunning and incredible. I'm sure, I know that you're going to be showing us that piece in a minute when you do your PowerPoint, so I won't say too much about it at this point. One thing I will ask now is that you describe your work as being experiments with binary motions. Is that motions? Or
Notions.
My writing, sorry. Of beauty and disgust, malice and tranquility, familiar yet otherworldly. What do you mean by that? I mean, I know what you mean because I've seen your work and I think to myself, I think this looks like some stuff that I'll be seeing in a film like Prometheus, whatever it's called, what's his name's film? Ridley Scott, some sort of Ridley Scott type of prop or costume or what have you.
Yeah.
How do you describe it? Your work?
Well, I want you to sort of be seduced by the aesthetic side of the work and be drawn in, and you sort of think it's familiar, and then you like, oh my, but this is bigger than I can't imagine how you do that. How so you're drawn by the familiar, let's say, layering of the feathers, so it might look familiar with the bird, and then but it's in a different form. It's sort of linked in with your sort of notions of mythological creatures. We all have this in our psyche. In every nation in the world, there's this belief in another creature that is other than human, and so I'm sort of tapping into that and sort of mixing them all up. And I don't really know what it means either, but it's sort of trying to work with those boundaries of drawing you in and making you question what you're seeing.
Have you always had an interest in that? Have you always sort of thought to yourself, there's more to life that meets the eye, and thought about the sort of darker side, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a dark mind, but I'm more interested in the confusion behind things, why things are set to be that. Why do we believe that? Why can why do you consider that beautiful but that ugly? And why, for example, is a pigeon regarded as a rat with wings, but a dove regarded as a symbol of purity when they're exactly the same bird? And so a lot of the work that I've been doing has been playing with that notion of beauty and purity and fecundity and disgust and dirt. So, who makes that decision? Why is it? So that's a lot about the work that I do.
Yeah, it's interesting about a dove and a pigeon, because I thought that myself. And even with doves, the purity and the sanctity is always illustrated as a white dove. And if it was a black dove, well, I've never seen a black dove sort of held up as a bird of.
Yeah. Well, it's the sign of the ascension. Not ascension. When Virgin Mary is visited by Gabriel, isn't it, to make her pregnant? That is the symbol of the dove. And it's used in all sorts of, Picasso used it in his symbol of freedom and purity. So it's there, isn't it? It's there, and it's held as a fact in a way, where it really, as we know, they are the same bird.
Yeah, interesting. Well, maybe at this point, unless anyone's got any questions in the Zoom room, any of you Zoomers, maybe at this point we could, if you could take us through some of your work.
Yes.
And then, we can chat.
I need that to go away. Okay, so I thought I'd show you the work that we've just been talking about, which is my degree showpiece that was made using 24,000 chicken wishbones. These are all battery farm chickens. And, you know, through my process of gathering, I always use objects that can't easily be bought or can't be bought. So where would you get that sort of quantity of wishbones? And I went to catering meat suppliers and got them to bone, when they were boning the meat, that they would cut off the wishbone with flesh on it and leave it in a box for me, and I would then come along and pick it up and clean it, boil them up and clean them. And, you know, through this process, I realized that battery farm chickens only live for an average of 36 days. It's completely horrifying. They're short and stumpy in comparison to, and bleached in comparison to what an organic chicken wishbone would look like, which is longer and more curved and all sorts of different colors, whereas the battery farm chickens are pretty uniformly pale. So this gives you an idea of the sort of scale of the piece, and this is me working on the center of the spiral. It is a spiral that, it is a complete spiral, and it's all done by eye. I didn't mark out the wall at all and just worked directly onto the wall. The wall is 7.5 meters by 5. And as I say, 24,000. This is a really rubbish photograph, but that gives you an idea of the scale, and that central center of the spiral is above my eye height.
How long did that take to put together? It's amazing.
That took about a month to put together, and every day I would invite a friend down and we would sit on the scaffolding together and talk. And it was a really collaborative effort. And so I'd timetable, there'd be somebody morning and afternoon to help me. And they would put the glue on the wishbones for me and I'd place them on the wall. So it was, I probably had, I don't know, 25 people down to help me do that. So in the same degree show, and the reason I put this in is just like this sort of notion of we all have bodies, but we don't really know them that well. And this was a video installation projected onto a glass sphere in a darkened space in the same degree show as the wishbone piece. And it was an image, video footage of a scrotum, and it is contracting and enlarging and changing color and looking like a walnut at times. And but I just thought it was quite interesting that a lot of men actually didn't recognize that as a scrotum, and you all have one.
I didn't at all. I thought it was a planet.
Yes, exactly. Well, I thought that was quite apt, really. And it changed color dramatically. And this friend of mine from college had sat on the edge of a chair for me with his scrotum dangling down, and I, you know, blew cold air at him or warm air, and it just changed. So that was that one. This is, you know, interesting in the remarkable patterns in nature. So this is my hair crown, and I shaved my head and I filmed my hair growing back on a time-lapse film. But actually what was really interesting was the perfection of the crown. And I, you know, it's just that I just find nature amazing, that we have this preordained system. The follicles are exactly the right distance apart to make a perfect head of hair. So I did a whole series of photographs of squaddies when they had their head shaved when they went into the army. So that was another piece. Again, this is about patterning in nature and preordained systems that we don't really understand. So a dentist can look at a child's mouth and he will know exactly where they are in their dental development because of which teeth evolve at certain times. As would a pigeon racing enthusiast be able to open the wing of his pigeon, and he would know exactly where they are in the molt and whether they can fly or not for their race. So it's sort of, you know, I see parallels in all of this. And this was a little animated film. I took photographs of my son every week for 24 months and had all his baby teeth fall out and his adult teeth grow in. So he turned from this cute little tiny teeth mouth to this monstrous mouth where the teeth are far too big for the mouth over that period of time. So any questions about that, that bits of work? But that, you know, that just shows you I'm not just interested in birds. It's about everything human and everything animal. It's like, why does that happen? Where does that come from? Why do we believe that? So this, I moved to my barge studio in 2005 after leaving the Royal College, and didn't really know what I was doing. But as I walked down to my studio each day, it was on a derelict island and it had a huge shed. And you could hear the pigeons cooing. And as I walked past, I would occasionally see sort of falling feathers. So I went inside and was collecting feathers on my walk with my dog. Saw that they were actually remarkable colours, and you know, this isn't a city environment, so the feathers were quite clean. So I started collecting them and then realised I needed a lot more. So I approached pigeon racing societies all over the country, got in touch with the Racing Pigeon Society, and they put me in touch with people that might be able to help me. Because they have captive birds, they will have the feathers that molt. So they molt in April and October, and they send me the feathers in envelopes through the post. And a lot of them have, you know, their telephone numbers on them, and please, I want to go home, and then their number, or their I am lost, I want to go home telephone number. So I thought that was quite an interesting additional thing. So you've got this sort of human imprint on a wild bird, but that is coming home on its own volition. And I made, you know, quite a bit of work about gushing water. So being on the river, it makes me very, very aware of the seasons and the current and the flow of the water. And that has seeped into my work. It appears in my work everywhere. So this is another gushing piece.
Sorry, just go back to the previous piece. Where was that? Was that
This
actually...
is in St Pancras Crypt in London. And they had this peculiar series of holes all around the edge of the building, and these individual crypts. So I felt that this was like, you know, a sewer. And what would be best to come out of a sewer but these rats with wings?
Yeah, so there's lots of meanings in your work. Obviously, you're collecting people's, I suppose, disgust, as well as you say, this is also for me very beautiful, but also a bit malevolent.
Yes, and the titles I give them are always things that they often mean more than one thing. So this is called Wretch, and you know, some people think that it looks like it's retreating into the hole, but I absolutely think it's gushing out of the hole. What do you think?
Coming out to me.
Yeah. And I realized that I could sort of paint with the feathers. It was a really interesting process, and you know, I just got a bit carried away really making installations with these feathers. So this one is called Heave, and we had a gallery space in Whitechapel that was going to be knocked down, so they didn't mind me making holes in the wall. So and this, you know, what I find is interesting is that these things, it's obviously site specific. I've made a hole in the wall, but then somebody wanted to show it in Athens, and they let me make a hole the same size in their wall, and then it's been off to Berlin, and you know, each time it needs a hole cut. So this is leading on from there. This is my first cabinet piece where I wanted to make a sort of a sculpture that was writhing around, that the cabinet itself would be the enclosure for the work, and it would dictate what the shape of the piece was inside the cabinet. So yeah, and I suppose it looks snake-like, although I think of it as it's a sort of universal shape in a way. It's no longer bird, it's no longer snake, it is a muscular like a mammal, or it has all sorts of different connotations. Because it is in that cabinet, it looks like a natural history specimen. I'm feeding off those things that we know for sure about that must be something precious because it's in that cabinet. So
It looks alive. It looks like it's just hibernating and it could just burst out at any moment.
yeah, this piece is actually in the collection at the Musée de la Chasse in Paris. It's a beautiful museum in the Marais where they have all sorts of things that are about hunting, but all sorts of natural history paintings and sculptures.
How long would that piece take to make?
The collecting of the feathers and the trimming and the sorting takes a long time, but maybe a couple of months to make that. This one I made entirely on my own, and after that I had some assistants, so they would do quite a lot of the trimming for me, so that obviously speeds up the process.
Yeah, a couple of questions here actually.
Yeah.
One person, Amanda, hello Amanda, she says, how did you put them together? Is there a base shape that you cover with feathers?
Well, I'd never tell anyone what that is, because I want you to wonder, is it squashy? Is it firm? Is it heavy? Is it light? And I think if I told you that would sort of get rid of some of the magic. So I don't do that.
Okay,
So you'll have to imagine.
Amanda, you have to keep guessing. And Claire thinks it's very slough-like, which I actually thought as well when I first saw that.
Yes, yeah. So this is a piece actually photographed on the island where I work. There's these beautiful old boat sheds, and they have wonderful light coming through. They used to make motor torpedo boats there during the war, and they have beautiful light coming through these. And this is crow feathers. And I'm always astounded by the iridescence on the crow and the purple and green and wonderful sheen that you get from those. I did a residency in New York, and when I arrived there, this is me and my brain sort of going, why is that happening? Why is that happening? So I arrived at the residency, and it was in a barn, and there was a gun on the table, and I always, I'd heard that, America's much easier with gun laws than we are, but why would you have why would you have a gun there? And it was to shoot the pigeons in the barn, to get rid of the pigeons in the barn. So I took the gun and I got rifle blanks, and it was a Winchester 22, and I depending on how close I was to the paper, I'd make a different intensity mark. So that is my pigeon shot with the gun that was meant to shoot them. This again is actually in St Pancras Crypt a few years later, again using the pigeon feathers and sort of more, slightly changing my technique for making the flow and the appearance of water. And so this is a pipe that is cut off on the ground, and it's gushing water. This is called sluice, and this was a room that was used during the war as an operating theatre. So you can see the green paint on the wall and the sort of circles on the wall. I think there were gauges and things up there. Anyway, I thought that was quite an interesting collaboration with my work.
Very nice.
This was a bit of a change. I was commissioned by Tatton Park Stately Home in Cheshire to make a piece for their Tatton Park Biennial. I walked around the house. It was also opulent. I just couldn't think how to make work that would suit with my he wanted to be gritty, but there everything was gilded and patterned and you know, ornate. So I got into the kitchen, and then it made so much sense to make a piece of work that was related to the birds that would have been cooked and eaten at the house and made in this kitchen. So this is the piece. It's called Evacuate. It was made from I looked at all the recipe books and of the house over the 250-year history of the house, and picked out every bird that was mentioned and tried to include that on so you've got pheasant and quail and you know, tiny little bits of mallard and teal, lots of pheasant, obviously, partridge, that sort of thing. And that was on display there for, I don't know, 6 months or something. You know, very much a site-specific piece. I can't use it anywhere else. But I really, that's where my passion is, to make site-specific installation that responds to an architectural space. This is the dove pigeon thing. So you've got, this is called quell, and it's a dove going round 2 pigeon feathers. So the grading the color of the feather to get darker, and then in the center you've got all the quills that I've cut off the feathers, and they sort of are massing in the center of it, sort of seething mass.
It's very swan-like.
Yeah. I mean, they're always references to actual things. I don't throw anything away. So these are the tail feathers of pigeons, and I've glued them together, attached them like a book. So they're on individual leaves, and they sit alongside each other, and they make this sort of coral type form. So you've got, I've always been fascinated by those, I think called mushroom corals. And so I was trying to sort of emulate something like that. And this is mallard duck, and just taking the, you know, these feathers come from the meat industry, the birds, so I get those from mallard farms, and just the exquisite color, the electric blue color of the wing feather is just astounding. So I've made quite a bit of work using this color, and I, you know, always you know, the lay person doesn't really know that that electric blue color exists on the wing of the mallard, but it is, you know, and they just think of them as boring old ducks.
Yeah,
but
that's the speculum, as they call it.
Yes.
Dennis has asked, how big is that piece?
It stands about 45 centimeters high, and is about that wide. So I don't know, 25 centimeters wide. This is magpie, and the crows and the magpies come from farmers that control the numbers of those birds on their farms. All the birds that I use are never ever killed for my work. They are an existing process, and I'm reusing something that already exists. So these birds I think would be burnt. I don't think so. I asked them to collect the feathers for me, and you know, again, you've got this astounding petrol blue color on the wing, that very few people seem to sort of acknowledge. They think about magpies being black and white, but this incredible color, and this is really flowing water for me. This was a building where they had a baptismal font that ran through the building. It was a sort of a spring water seam that ran through the rock face, and they built this Georgian building around this stream that came through the building, and then they channeled it into this font, and you'd had full baptism things happening. And then this is in the basement, so this is my response to that, and it's called Secrete, and I feel as if it's oozing out of the building.
Absolutely. It's interesting you said about what you said about magpies. So I remember taking a group of kids out in North London who weren't interested in nature initially. And when I showed them a magpie, they said, "Oh my God, look at it! Look at the colours!" You know,
Yeah.
because the iridescence in the sun. You know, magpies are really underrated. People don't look at them
Exactly. Well,
at
that's what I'm
all.
hoping people do with the work that I'm doing. Look again at those birds and see what beauty there is in the things that people regard as being boring, and often pests. But there is beauty there. This is a more recent. This is a piece I made last year, made out of pheasant feathers. So obviously get feathers from the shoot. I absolutely hate the fact that the shoots happen and there are often people that don't even eat their birds that they shoot. They go along and pay for the day and shoot 20 pairs or whatever it is and then walk away. So I find that very difficult. And they're such beautiful birds, beautiful feathers, incredibly ornate. I space them in a way that actually wouldn't appear on the bird. Most of that, the whiter areas of the feathers, the triangles, you wouldn't actually see. They are, you would see the iridescent edges overlapping each other, and those pointed feathers would be concealed underneath. This was also made 2018 for a commission for the Albury Festival. My mum and dad lived in Norfolk and Suffolk, and this felt like coming home to Suffolk, and I made a big installation which I'll just show you. But this was in the auditorium at the entrance to the concert hall. And you drive around any, well, certainly in Suffolk, I'm not sure about other areas of the country, but there'll be dead pheasants all over the roads of cars that have mown them down. And, I know they're considered as being rather stupid birds, but it seems the amount of roadkill is shocking. And I wonder whether people, if they just drove a little bit slower, whether it wouldn't happen in quite the same way.
Yeah, part of the reason, though, unfortunately, is the overpopulation of pheasants we have. The breeders put out millions upon millions of them. So,
Yeah. But they are beautiful birds. And that's what I want to show in the work, that you've actually got these things that are sort of dismissed, but they are astounding. So this is the commission that I made for the Albury Festival in the Dovecote, the old Dovecote at Snape Maltings, and it was sort of set out in the direction of the incoming water. So they're very worried in that area about rising sea levels, and this was done in the direction that the sea is coming in from the sea to the land. And it's called Sass Sluice, which is Sass is an old word for a lock or a sluice gate. And on the left is a picture that is in black and white, but on the right is the actual colour of the feathers and how they sort of shot out of the wall, seeping through the building. I like I'm trying to, I suppose, in a lot of the work where I'm depicting or emulating water, it's very much about the fact that the water can be beautiful and look benign, but actually can be teeming underneath and could drag you under and is very dangerous. So I swim in the river, but I read the river well, and I would not swim in certain situations where I can see when there's eddies, and I'm always very careful. But I'm very I'm in awe of the river and its power, and so I'm careful.
Yeah.
The last slide I want to show you is a collaboration I'm going to be doing in 2022 with an artist called Rebecca Jewell. Now, these are not my images; this is hers, and she's an artist illustrator, and she does these incredible drawings onto feathers. and we're going to be doing a collaboration together of extinct and endangered species birds, and we're going to be printing on and drawing onto feathers, and then they will be shown as a sort of murmuration going across the wall, so that you're looking, and we're hoping that that's going to sort of make people think about what they're doing and what is endangered. So it might go from very old extinct birds to things that have only recently become extinct, and then ones that are endangered. So as a sort of storyline.
Yeah, this particular species, I think they're from Hawaii, and it's the male and female got different beaks. Is that right?
I don't know what they are actually. She's just sent me those as a example of what we're going to try and do.
Yeah, it's incredible to see a species with the genders having completely different shaped beaks. It's incredible, and we've lost that.
Is that because he is building the nest and he needs to lift twigs or something? Is it
no, that? No, it's adaptation in terms of feeding. So they must have inhabited an area of habitat in Hawaii where maybe there was competition. So the female might have fed on different food to the male, so they can actually have as much as possible in terms of diversity of food. So maybe that's it. But that's a really unusual evolution, really.
Yeah, incredible. So that's the end of my slides. So let me stop sharing.
Superb. Absolutely amazing. I mean, as I said, when I first came across you, I absolutely adored the work that you do. I think it's beautiful. Excuse me, Fran's got a question. In fact, Fran, do you want to come on live and ask your question? Are you there, Fran?
Yeah, hi.
Hello, Fran.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Kate, do you ever do any with political statements, or do you just see them as political statements anyway, or do you think other people read them as political, to do with the birds now? You're saying you don't like the fact that how the birds end up dead, kind of thing.
I think it's a very soft political message. I want people to sort of think twice about, or think more than twice about, what they're doing and how they impact the world, and maybe me showing something that is actually exquisite out of something that they disregard. I think maybe I'm asking them to think again, but it's never overtly political. No.
Do people when you've got an exhibition going on, do people have a conversation with you to do with the birds?
Yes, lots. I mean, they often don't believe that it's pigeon, because they have such a deep set view of what pigeons are, and they go, "Oh, that's so beautiful! That's so beautiful! What bird is it?" And then you're like, "Oh!" So they almost sort of run away because they're so ingrained. I mean, that's the hierarchy of birds and how they exist in even people sort of think of peregrine falcons as being absolutely wonderful things, but they eat all sorts of other birds. But why is that okay, sort of thing? So all these birds that are disregarded because the peregrine's eating it, and that's fantastic. But then if you'd seen it on its own, you'd have loved that little bird that it's eating. So I'm always questioning that. I don't believe in the hierarchy, really.
Okay, Fran.
Okay.
You can see more of your work, by the way. You can see more of Kate's work if you're interested at MccGwire.com. Just out of interest, it's a very sort of odd question, really, I suppose, in a way. Not to do with your art, but to do with your surname. I've never seen a MccGwire spelt with MCC. Is that a stylistic thing, or is that actually?
No. It's. I married Paddy MccGwire, Irish descent, anyway. And it is, I think, a combination between Flemish mercenaries, and going to Flanders and then coming back to Ireland, and it changing. It was MccGwire and then it changed to MccGwire. but it's quite useful having such a weird spelling name.
Yeah, it stands out because you often think, did I spell that right?
Yeah, a lot of people correct it.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. Has it always been pigeons that you've used, or feathers for that matter? Have you ever used any other material?
Lots of other materials. I mean, I've been pretty occupied by feathers, and I haven't quite finished in the last 10 years. So yeah, but I do use, I only showed you bird related objects really in the slideshow, although scrotum and teeth were involved as well, and hair.
Absolutely. When it comes to feathers, do you actually study feathers? I mean, obviously you talked about how the pigeon fanciers or the pigeon racing guys and girls know when or what stage their pigeon's molt is in. But do you actually find feathers fascinating as items in themselves?
I mean, yes, absolutely incredible. It's what I think is fascinating when I'm making work with those mallard feathers, for example. There might be 6 of those iridescent speculum feathers, and they will all have a slightly different curve. It's almost like they are the fingers on a hand. They have different lengths. On every wing, there is a slightly different shape. So if I'm doing a piece that requires them all to be universal, I'll have to get a number 2 feather from the right wing from a lot of different birds to be able to get those to line absolutely perfectly together. So yeah, they are fascinating. The fact that you can be so light. So I've got one here. This is, can you see that? A magpie feather. That it can be so light, and you can't see the colour on the underside, but you can see the colour on the top side. That's fascinating. I don't think you could make that as a human being, could you? That something so thin, so light, so engineered, that does a perfect job and that is beautiful. Pretty impressive in such a small thing.
Nature is amazing.
And you know, the fact that I can get a feather that is not looking very nice, and you can preen it and you can work on it and you can get it to look perfect again. I can even wash feathers. I had to wash all the dove feathers because they look slightly yellow, so I washed them all. They look like rags, and then just fluttered them in the breeze, and they just come back to be perfect again.
Fantastic. What is your favourite bird, Kate?
Kingfisher.
I was expecting pigeon.
No, definitely kingfisher. They are just so special. Just you know, I'm so lucky to have them here.
Have you used kingfisher feathers in your art?
No, and I report anyone that does. Because, they are endangered and protected, aren't they? So I've seen a couple of times people sell them on eBay, and I will report them each time. So. Okay.
And if you could be anywhere on this planet right this very moment, notwithstanding the current pandemic, where would you be?
Can I change that question slightly? I would like to be here, but I'd like it to be May, and with the summer ahead of me rather than the winter ahead of me. So.
Well, I think that's a very good answer. I'll take that. We've come to the end of the first hour, and what I want to do, when I say first hour, it's only 1 hour. What I'd like to do is quickly tell everyone, and the Zoomers involved as well tonight, that we have a couple more in conservation with coming up. Tomorrow, we got the 2 guys, Ollie and Nadeem, who set up the bird gang, as they call it, and it's called Flock Together, and it's all about getting ethnically diverse people out birding, and they've got this whole thing going on in London, which started during lockdown, so we'll be talking about that tomorrow. It's going to be a little gap, and then on November the 23rd, we've got Matt Young, who'd been on before actually. He's an American ornithologist, and his colleague Patrick Frank, and they both have set up this organisation called Finch Research Network, and they'll be talking about their work. On the 26th of November, we got Rick Simpson, who is the co-founder of Wader Quest, and he'll be talking about his and his wife's plight to save waders around the world, shorebirds around the world. And on November the 30th, Heather Wolf, who is a really amazing urban birder from New York, and she'll be talking about Brooklyn Bridge Park, her patch, which she founded 10 years ago and now is really kind of well known. And on December the 1st, we've got Scott Wiedensall and Barbara Vickery, who have written a book called Birds of Maine, and they've been talking about the birds of Maine. And finally, on December the 3rd, Terry Townsend, who's a guy who lives in Beijing, and he'll be talking about the birds and the wildlife and all the other stuff that goes on in Beijing. And we've got some other great people like MccGwire. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she is an amazing, credible photographer from the US. She has some beautiful images that she puts out there, beautiful. And also another Melissa Harrison, who is a writer, nature writer, well awarded, and she'll be coming to talk to us as well. So it's quite a lot of people coming up over the next few weeks and months. At this point, I'd like to thank you, Kate, for being here and showing us your amazing work. It's been really enlightening and beautiful to see.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.